Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ayusha Khan. On behalf of the Strategic Vision Institute, I welcome you all to International Talk on Emerging Technologies, Impact on Conventional and Nuclear Strategies. Before we proceed further, I would like to mention here that this talk is conducted in the form of panel discussion. If anyone from the online audience would like to ask a question, they are requested to kindly use the Q&A option to type out their questions. I would also request that please do include your name as well as organizational affiliations along with your questions. The questions will then be presented to our panel by the moderator during the question and answer sessions accordingly. Please further note that all the opinions voiced at the SBI platform are independent opinions and of the speakers and audiences and not the official policy of the internet. This session is being live streamed on our Facebook page and our official website. The full recording of the talk will be available on the official website and YouTube channel of the SBI. Ladies and gentlemen, technology has always played a critical role in international political and security environment. Previously, the inventions like technologies of jet engine, missile systems, submarine, nuclear weapons, PMD, changed state behaviors in peace times, during crisis, and also in wartime. Today, world is going through a new technological era where we are witnessing advancement in autonomous weapons, artificial intelligence, remote sensing, cyber technology, hypersonic vehicle, and additive manufacturing, precision guidance. These developments give birth to pertinent questions like, will these technologies change the conduct of the war itself? Will these technologies make war and escalation more plausible, or possible, or will some of them might reduce the level of the violence and encourage restraint? So to find the answers to these questions and like these many more, and deliberate on the topic of the emerging technologies, impact on conventional and nuclear strategy in detail, I'm very delighted today that we have distinguished speakers. Our first speaker today is Dr. Naeem Salik. Dr. Naeem Salik is currently Executive Director at the SBI Islamabad. He has taught at the Qaid-e-Azam University, National Defense University, Air University, Islamabad. He has been a visiting scholar at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University and guest scholar at the Brookings Institute, Washington, D.C. Besides being a visiting fellow at the Stanford University and Stimson Center, he has previously served as the Director for Arms Control and Disarmament Affairs at the Strategic Plans Division, Pakistan. He holds a Master's in History from Punjab University, a BSc Honours in War Studies from Balochistan University, an MSc in Strategic Studies from University of Wales, and PhD from the University of Western Australia. His areas of expertise include South Asian security with special reference to India and Pakistani policies on nuclear and missile issues, nuclear non-proliferation, arms control, disarmament, nuclear and conventional confidence-building measures, nuclear safety, security, and export controls. He has published 4 books, including 2 edited volumes, several monographs, and contributed 7 book chapters. His published work also includes 40 research articles. Sir, so without further ado, I would like to request you to give your introductory remarks.
Thank you, Aisha, for the kind introduction. I would like to formally welcome our guest speaker today. I think given the subject matter of today's talk, we have a very eminently qualified person to speak on this. Antoine has been an old friend and colleague, and I'm looking forward to listening to his views on this very important subject. I have also recently done some work on this and have been interested in various aspects of this subject. The emerging technologies which we see around, it's still a work in progress. Some of these technologies have matured and some are still in the stage of evolution. And we do not exactly know how they are going to turn out to be, because it always happens that whenever a new technology is introduced, there is a lot of fanfare about it, a lot of expectations. Some of those technologies do not live up to those expectations, and some of them end up being so cost prohibitive that their use at any reasonable scale becomes very difficult. So we have yet to see how these technologies actually emerge and mature, and then the combined effect of many of these technologies, how it is going to impact both conventional and nuclear strategies. Many of these emerging technologies, they have been dubbed as disruptive technologies because of the fact that they pose serious challenges to survivability of offensive strategic forces, capability of defensive forces, reliable functioning of command and control, communication, and intelligence systems. And some of these have the potential to accelerate or escalate the crises and add to the crisis instability. And as I said, it will all depend. The large-scale use will depend on the actual cost, because if they are cost prohibitive, then obviously the large-scale application will not be possible. Some of these technologies we are well aware of. High energy lasers, they are being used extensively now, particularly in newer roles for the defense of naval platforms against the drones. And even we have seen in the Russia-Ukraine conflict that these kind of lasers have been used to disable the drones. Similarly, the hypersonic technologies, there's a lot has been said about these. These include the hypersonic cruise missiles as well as the hypersonic glide vehicles. And then to enable all these things and to add to the value is the artificial intelligence and the quantum computing or big data analysis. These are all related things. The effect of artificial intelligence and the quantum computing capabilities would be that the huge amount of intelligence we are now receiving through various sensors that we have now, it was humanly impossible to sift through all that huge volume of incoming intelligence and turn it into some useful information and actionable options. But with these kind of technologies, it has become now possible to analyze and that data in very quick time. And then with the help of AI, you immediately get response options. Now, this means that the decision-making time has been compressed a great deal, and you will have a very short time period to decide on any course of action. It won't give you enough time to think of the pros and cons of what is going to happen, because you have the results immediately in front of you. You have the options from which you can pick up any option instantly. And since you also know the speed of these hypersonic and other weapons and the similar kind of decision-making capabilities on the other side, so you will always be pressed for time and taking decisions under the pressure of time. And there the problem then is that the crisis can escalate very quickly. It won't give you enough time to deliberate before you really take an action. So that's a big danger which is coming up, and we have to guard against it. And secondly, the more we start to depend on artificial intelligence, particularly in the decision-making processes, that will create another problem, that the human input into the decision-making process will reduce accordingly. And because of that, then that degree of human compassion and feelings, that will not be there. and that can lead to some decisions which ordinarily a human being in control of the decision making may avoid because of the humane aspects of the human nature. Additionally, we have seen that the cyber capabilities are advancing, and they have a potential to disrupt not only the economic activities and the social setup we have, which is more and more dependent on online transactions now. So it can be disrupted by the cyber attacks. But cyber attacks also have the capability to disrupt the command and control and also the operation of sensitive installations like nuclear power plants and other nuclear installations, which can cause very dangerous consequences. Now, in addition to this, we have these drones which can stay airborne for very long hours, and they have very long loitering time over the target, and they can give you real-time information. Similarly, these new emerging technology of microsatellites, these are small satellites with very advanced sensors, and they can be launched in large numbers. So the combination of the microsatellites and the drones flying overhead all the time will mean that the advantage you had of unknown locations of the mobile platforms and your retaliatory strike forces, that will be affected very badly, and as a result would be that it will dent your second strike retaliatory capabilities. Similarly, we depended a lot for a short second strike capability on the submerged submarine-based nuclear capabilities. But with the introduction of underwater, unmanned underwater vehicles, which can again be launched underwater in the form of swarms, some of these could just be carrying sensors, and some of these can even carry the warheads. So they can easily detect the submarines and also can attack the submarines. So if the survivability of the submarines is effective, then that will have an adverse effect on the reliability of the second strike retaliatory capabilities. This will, and there are other technologies also which are developing, and that is why this concept of transparent oceans is coming up, because unlike the past where things underwater could not be easily detected, now there are developments in many technology areas which are likely to make the seas transparent as much as the over the surface platforms. So these will have obviously a very serious impact on the concept of the assured second strike capability and the credibility of deterrence. So all these, the combined effect of these can cause disruption and cause instability in the strategic balance which we know of as of now. So these are futuristic things. Some of these technologies have yet to mature, but if we are aware of their negative consequences, we should start thinking about some measures to mitigate their negative impact and bring in some mutually agreed those constraints on the use and development of these technologies through multilateral treaties and agreements to regulate their use so that they do not have, they give us the positive benefits, but they do not cause disruption in the strategic stability and cause greater problems than we face now. So I won't go beyond this. I would leave the rest to our eminent speaker today, and then to the question answer session, where you are most welcome to ask any question that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Salik. Ladies and gentlemen, today our guest speaker for today is Mr. Antoine. He's currently serving as Research Fellow for South and Central Asian Defense Strategy and Diplomacy, International Institute for Strategic Studies, London. Antoine specializes in the facts and assessments of South Asian policies towards China, regional nuclear issues, as well as Pakistan's political and security perspectives, South and Central Asian defense, strategy and diplomacy program, activities of research, assessment, as well as convening and outreach to officials and other audiences through publication and discussions in and outside of the region. He has been working at the Institute of International Strategic Studies on South Asian issues since 2008. In 2009, he has been a visiting international fellow at the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi. Since 2010, he has coordinated and participated in the IISS annual track 1.5 series of meetings in Oman, Bahrain, Pakistan, and India. He regularly travels to Pakistan. He holds an MSc Economy in International Politics. Antoine, thank you for joining us today, and over to you.
Ayusha, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Dr. Salik, it is such a pleasure to be back with you and be among you colleagues in Islamabad, but also with colleagues and friends online. We have an excellent group, and I look forward to our exchanges. I'm here to learn more than talk, given the collective sum of experience that we have around this virtual discussion. And so what I want to do is to speak from an international IISS civilian, and I do insist on this civilian perspective, as a London-based European and keen observer of Southern Asia in the Asia-Pacific, or the Indo-Pacific, as it is commonly understood, including, as I understand it, since recently in Pakistan. I speak relying on a decade-plus experience of Track 1.5 work in the region, Europe and the US, specifically focused on nuclear and regional security issues in South Asia, as well as a broader set of conversations on nuclear weapons in a global context. I also speak on the basis of a noted IISS report on nuclear deterrence and strategic stability, which some of you will have been aware of, which I released in 2021 and discussed with colleagues with much pleasure in Islamabad only last September. The report has since been circulated widely in the region. I will divide my thoughts into 4 parts. 1, how emerging technologies entangle technology, economics, and defense. 2, how emerging technologies relate to the changing distribution of global power. 3, how emerging technologies mingle and intertwine with military strategy, the core of our subject today and our discussion. And 4, some implications for South Asia. Please bear with me. Dr. Salik has given us a very good introduction substantively to all these issues, so I will try to develop them further and bring my own perspective to them in a systematic way. So first, something about emerging technologies and their entanglement with broader technology, economics, and defense. I want to make 6 points here. First, the meaning of what constitutes emerging technologies, as Dr. Salik said, varies depending on countries' self-image and other factors, their strategic outlook for themselves, their established degree of modernization of their economy and national security, their willingness and economic industrial ability to compete at the cutting edge. An emerging technology for an emerging or frontier market economy aspiring to be a regional or middle power does not mean the same thing than it does for the world's technology leader, the United States, or indeed for countries with global whole of nation strategic reach, first among which China. Emerging technologies are at the heart of strategic assessment and future-proofing of nations, as ministers, civilian and defence intelligence chiefs alike increasingly openly tell their national publics. For states alone, emerging technologies recurringly create vast uncertainty, as Dr. Salik also mentioned, and expectations, opportunity and threat, overblown pessimism about loss of control, stability and sovereignty, as well as over-optimism about leapfrogging, dominance, decisive advantage, or bullets. Secondly, to simply underline the stakes of emerging technologies, I will just quote what the UK's external intelligence chief, Richard Moore, said publicly at the IISS at the end of 2021, and I quote, "We live in a world transformed by digital connectivity and stand on the cusp of revolutionary advances in technology which will affect the way we live and work in ways we cannot fully foresee." He continues, "We may experience more technological progress in the next 10 years, that is to 2031, than we have in the last century, with a decisive impact equal to the Industrial Revolution. As a society, we have to yet internalize this stark fact and its potential impact on global geopolitics. It is a white-hot focus for his organization," he ended. This, to me, really sets the stakes. My third point is that emerging technologies are hard to discuss as a single cohesive group. These include, as Dr. Salik also mentioned, hypersonic or directed energy weapons, anti-satellite weapons and other space-based assets, artificial intelligence of the generative type or the large language model type, machine learning and autonomous weapons, quantum engineering and related offensive and defensive cryptography, data mining, processing and related behavioral sciences, distributed ledger technology such as blockchain, specialist chip design and mass production, software-defined defense, synthetic biology, etc. Nuclear weapons, an old technology in itself, are still relatively new to South Asia 25 years on. Barriers and externalities to them are still very high in certain respects, not least the growing life cycle costs, which national economies have to support. So discussion of nuclear-armed submarines, maneuverable re-entry vehicles, or ballistic missile defense, however reflective of emerging technologies back in the 1970s in the US, Russia, China context, is still, in fact, a live issue at the edge of competition for India and Pakistan. For purposes of this defense discussion, I won't discuss the contribution of the new nuclear sector and small modular reactors to prosperity and possibly beyond. At a more practical end of the spectrum, emerging technologies include new drone concepts, including loitering and or underwater ones, armed or not, but also, most importantly, the realization and new combination of old ideas, such as satellite constellations in low orbit, only made economically viable by the new space industry. Innovative combinations of mature and widely available civilian technologies for military purposes mean that emerging technologies are not just about the what, but also the how and the when of innovation. What tends to bind, in conclusion to this point, what tends to bind emerging technologies as a single category above all is their cost, the high barriers to entry, and long development timelines from fundamental research to usable capability, in military terms at least. Any typology of emerging technologies must otherwise rest on the objectives and means of given countries. That is to say that beyond that general categorization, you have to look at specific country conditions to be able to draw any further conclusions as to how countries relate to emerging and disruptive technology. My further point is that in the last 2 decades, the triangle between technology, economics, and defense has tightened ever more under the effects of genuine technological innovations, but also strategic competition, primarily between the US and China, market herding dynamics, for example, look at artificial intelligence in 2023, public-private partnerships spanning the whole globe, nascent, large domestic and unregulated markets. That applies to social media and their strategic effects, but not only. Artificial intelligence is one of those currently being discussed as being ripe for regulation, as well as, of course, security dilemmas. This triangle is at the heart, for instance, of a IISS series of meetings on advanced technologies, which has met twice in Singapore. My next point is to add that most innovations emerge in the civilian economy, but are relevant to national security. This is either because they have a direct dual application for a range of purposes, including intelligence, influence, command and control, compellence, deterrence, all the way to direct use of force, or because coalitions of the willing develop them for themselves or close partners and allies in such a way that creates a networked industrial base, ultimately supporting shared prosperity, defense, and collective deterrence. In such cases, the experience, depth, breadth, and sophistication of the national innovation, industrial, and educational talent base, as well as the ability to tap deep global capital pools, determines which companies and countries lead. The more dematerialized the dual-use innovations which come out of this, the more easily their supply chain can be globalized in development and industrialization, and the easier the development for national security purposes across geographies. Denmark was notable in pioneering in 2018 the concept of technology ambassador to fit these new purposes of connecting global economics and national security. My next point is to add that to acquire or retain innovation leadership and to enable wider strategic goals, states also, beyond dual-use technologies, acquire purpose-made technologies for national security purposes only. This is receiving particular policy attention and funding worldwide, regardless of where you are sitting and with the share of related known unknowns growing, given how important secrecy or at least proprietary commercial data is to innovation. There is a pattern to this. Often the United States tested a first ever demonstrator of an emerging technology during the Cold War to conclude its unaffordability and strategic unviability, only to find years later Russia and China following suit and thoroughly to the point of serializing production and equipping their armed forces. Examples of this include missiles, but also space. Even so, when pursued, often such defense or security-first capabilities are supported by secondary civilian applications for purposes of economic cost-sharing, deception, or ambiguity. Think here of concepts of space proximity operations for military purposes, fine-tuned under the guise of friendly repair operations. My next additional point is to add that co-equal in importance to norms and values, emerging technologies are the common bedrock to all general national security documents, such as strategies, reviews, defense, white or command papers, but also in some cases more specialized military-led doctrines or postures. I'm looking here, among others, at Pakistan's 2021 first ever national security policy, which includes an interesting, though small section on space security. Or I'm looking here at the Indian Air Force's 2023 doctrine, which speaks of leveraging ingenuity and innovation in tactics and technique to tackle high-end technology. Such documents make budgeting for future-proofing capabilities somewhat easier, though it is by no means easy. The point was made last month at the IISS Shangri-La Dialogue by no other than the US Director of National Intelligence in an open session. More broadly, the point holds even truer when resource planning is under stress from a challenged national macroeconomic and growth scenario. But national security documents set roadmaps which whole-of-government national security advisors and defence planners can more easily rely on to set policy and focus implementation. This brings me to my second section, emerging technologies and the changing distribution of global power. I want to make 2 points here. The first point is that emerging technologies are central to strategic competition in the new age of major and great power competition and the quest for sovereign technological advantage through self-reliance or sufficiency. Concurrently, however, the management of their life cycle costs, the sheer complexity of their supply chains, including distortions such as decoupling, de-risking, friendshoring, and trusted buyer-supplier frameworks, the involvement of global corporations at many stages of the life cycle all mean partnerships with others are co-substantive of emerging technologies. The need for partnerships creates opportunities for groups of countries to come together while at the same time making it impossible to shed any and all dependencies on others, be they on rare earths, for example, or on fundamental research or more applied know-how. The second point here is to add that emerging technologies are therefore at the centre of contests for redistribution of comprehensive national power. States face stark choices to share their emerging technology advantages with some to better restrict access to others. This determination is increasingly made based on strategic outlook and national interest rather than global market dynamics, and only secondarily based on established rules and norms. Although I would add here that it is a matter of incontrovertible fact, in my view, that conditional proliferation by the West does not apply to nuclear weapons. Look, for example, to how, at the Shangri-La Dialogue, Australian leaders have made very clear on the record that in the context of AUKUS, there is no proliferation of nuclear weapons involved in that agreement. As an instrument for the redistribution of power, emerging technologies feature prominently in leadership-level bilateral and pluri- or minilateral joint statements. They increasingly motivate technological and technical diplomatic specialized sectoral international working groups, often leaning on the corporate private sector for their own purposes. Look, for example, to quad format meetings on the governance and security of the cyber domain. Emerging technologies form the basis on which old state alliances and partnerships are also reinvigorated and new ones are formed. On the flip side, unless they are genuinely open and inclusive, single emerging technology-based partnerships or groupings of countries and related interests can create their own protective impediments to free and global trade of emerging technologies on national security grounds. See, for example, the interesting developments around the so-called CHIPS 4 grouping, which includes the United States, Japan, the Republic of Korea, and Taiwan. The broad basing and fragmentation of the governance of this trade, aka export control regimes, is nothing new since the end of World War II. But the current momentum behind emerging technologies reinvigorates old policy questions about the benefits, actual possibilities, and power politics of restricting access and use of emerging technologies to the few rather than the most. This brings me to my third section, emerging technologies and military strategy, the heart of our discussion today. I want to make 3 points here. The first one is to say that drawing on the war in Ukraine, as Dr. Salik reminded us, States, their militaries and corporations globally are learning new lessons and unlearning old ones on the implications of emerging technologies for conventional military strategy. Neither of this invalidates for pre-existing need for jointness, preparedness, training, enabling, etc. Among the most closely observed developments are those in the cyber and space domains, where unprecedented public-private partnerships have formed on Ukraine's side to particularly dramatic effects, enhancing both strategic and operational C2 ISR, building awareness, resilience, persistence, all enabling precision and of the extreme sort, as France's top general called it only a couple of days ago in The Economist. Aside from the innovative use of drones, Russia's use of advanced missiles and Ukraine's use of advanced air defenses have disrupted the understanding of the balance of offense and defense. It's not just tactical, it affects the broad strategic uses of air power. The IISS has a program entitled the Missile Dialogue Initiative, which I relate to, which looks at all these issues in detail. Networking warfare better without necessarily using emerging technologies is. There is the additional context here of smaller states defending against larger ones, a situation I know Pakistan is sensitive to. And the war has changed the understanding of the ecology of military innovation, particularly the relationship between weaponization, frugality, globally competitive but locally available IT talent pools, and online fundraising, as Dr. Salik reminded us. Generally, emerging technologies appear to demonstrate that it is possible to enhance defense while preventing unwanted warfighting escalation. This matters because the inherent advantages of advanced technology are generally assumed to be such that they can bring decisive advantage counter escalating against. Entanglement issues aside, in operational terms, hypersonic cruise missiles may appear today to be less of a strategic non-capability than they did 18 months ago. More generally, depending on how narrowly focused on nuclear weapons is the definition of strategic stability, the war in Ukraine has either infirmed or confirmed traditional understandings of strategic stability. And I'll speak to more of this later below. My second additional point here is to say that emerging technologies today just as much of an intellectual challenge than they did at the start of the Cold War in relation to nuclear weapons and deterrence at the highest end of the spectrum of conflict. Questions surrounding strategic deterrence and escalation control in the cyber domain in a nuclearized environment are over 2 decades old. Despite numerous Track 1, 1.5 and Track 2 formats meeting series, there is little by the way of shared sense of a lexicon, grammar and practices across major and great powers as to how to induce and actively manage stability involving cyber weapons. The IISS has done groundbreaking work trying to simply rank cyber powers in proficiency tiers. And that means addressing the dynamic relations, let alone in conflict, between these powers is incredibly demanding. The proliferation of both militarized and weaponized systems in the space domain threatens nuclear early warning and possibly some command and control systems. From space to land, commercial and government ISR, coupled with artificial intelligence analysis, stands to change appreciations of mutual vulnerability, which nuclear deterrence relies on. At a more practical level, the integrity of nuclear command and control and communications, NC3, is a renewed area of vigilance and interest, including for NGOs. An additional point here is to say that emerging technologies pose an unprecedented challenge to statecraft, focused as much on advantage than it is on risk reduction and stability. Emerging technologies have rekindled major efforts to understand the process limits of human decision-making in the abstract, but as well as in the regional context, under specific scenarios using emerging and disruptive technologies. Look no further, for instance, to a January 2023 enlightening Financial Times piece entitled very simply, 300 nuclear missiles are heading your way. You must respond. What now? The Ukraine war is prompting reappraisals of graduated escalation, defense versus escalation, but also appreciation of red lines. One line of effort surrounds how to think about strategic stability in unstable times, more generally, to take the title of an excellent recent UK-hosted Wilton Park Track 1.5 meeting. Public proceedings of this meeting concluded that new strategic stability can only be fought through beyond nuclear weapons, beyond nuclear actors, and by acknowledging regional actors, such as India and Pakistan. Entanglement with the cyber domain poses a particular challenge for lessons learning. Data about past events in the cyber domain, which could form the basis for collective learning if shared widely, remain in fact tightly held by both attackers and defenders amid well-known attribution challenges. The space domain is comparatively a lot more transparent, but efforts to create a shared middle powers-led situational awareness governance system, aka a space traffic control system, are still somewhere away from reality. A IISS project supporting the relevant UN open-ended working group on space, which I've been involved in, has very promising but also very significant challenges to point to policymakers in that respect. But it all forms part of a continuum of governance and strategy which affects the highest order of contingencies when it comes to strategic deterrence. Other important questions surround the future of arms control in no-trust environments, what strategic guardrails and risk reduction mean in a world of emerging technologies, and which norms of so-called responsible behavior can be enshrined in new stabilizing regimes globally and regionally. Let me now turn to my fourth and last section. I want to make 4 points here. South and Southern Asia never experienced a peace dividend from the end of the Cold War. I think this is an important point. Unresolved disputes and ongoing tensions, as well as India and Pakistan's decision to overtly become nuclear-armed states in 1998, prevented them from reaping the full benefits of export-led and trade globalization. Pakistan and India, therefore, are not relearning about these issues of emerging technology, strategic stability, and the like. They have arguably done so continuously for the last 4 decades as a matter of topmost national security. So both national security establishments in both countries have depth and analysis at their tip of their fingers to understand these issues. My second point is that sufficiency and, critically, affordability are paramount to the defense and security outlook for emerging technologies in South Asia. NATO countries' cutting edge for emerging technologies is not South Asia's, although it is China's, which brings the question of tethering and bifurcation of capabilities down the nuclear chain in a Southern Asia context. In the next decade, some of the strategic focus in South Asia will be on space-based capabilities and uses, as led mostly by India. But much of the India-Pakistan deterrence, strategic deterrence and operations will hinge on more traditional air and sea power, especially with developments in nuclear deterrence in the maritime domain. Hardly a new phase for most other nuclear weapon states, but still a fairly new one for India and Pakistan. Again, affordability in the face of widening gaps in comprehensive national power for both Pakistan and India, but also for India and China, promises to perpetuate defense capability and doctrine asymmetries, with emerging technologies being both part of the problem, but also part of the solution, particularly for India. The temptation to simply raise the salience of nuclear weapons as a simplistic response to emerging technologies induced and other complexities is not a real-world policy option. The further point is to add that if emerging technologies stand to change escalation management in future crises, prudence, restraint, and minimalism remain more than relevant, if only on account of the increasing pathways for cross-domain escalation. I do not see artificial intelligence start displacing the human factor in nuclear weapons related decision-making in South Asia for quite some years. But artificial intelligence and deepfakes could play a negative role in distorting perceptions of escalation in future crises. I do not expect countries to change their nuclear doctrines in haste as a result, including in South Asia. As my colleagues and I noted in our 2021 report, nuclear doctrine in particular deserves to be respected, and changes to it need to be carefully considered. Reviews can take place, and wider conventional doctrines can evolve, as higher defense management may do too, but slowly and towards integrated and joint deterrence. But nuclear doctrines ought to arguably be the last corner worth changing. A further point is to say that, as I argued in 2021 in the report I published, emerging technologies in the region concern select interest and emerging acquisition of narrow or even niche capabilities. However, threat perceptions still run ahead of the reality of those slow-moving developments, as Dr. Salik mentioned in his introduction. In the last 2 years, both Pakistan and India have made public their new interest in a range of emerging technologies, which they will seek to acquire for their defense and security purposes by themselves or through the help of others. These include artificial intelligence, space, drones, information domain tools, but also quantum in the case of India. Lack of trust and reassurance mean each side is struggling to refrain from passing sweeping and mechanistic judgments about the extent to which the other side may be partnering with third parties. China for Pakistan in the case of India, and the US for India in the case of Pakistan. India and Pakistan may have a chance to resume dialogue after their current national election cycles end and a hiatus of 12 years is over. Emerging technologies would need to feature prominently in the conventional and nuclear CBM's meeting should they resume. The way emerging technologies promote unprecedented transparency of the battlefield would lower, in my view, the cost of having new transparency CBMs, which India and Pakistan could discuss and finally adopt. Otherwise, aside from the back channels, and as Pakistan's chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff himself emphasized at the IISS Shangri-La dialogue last month, Track 1.5 dialogues remain critical, including on emerging technologies. These are all the more important that third countries, assuming they are welcome to play any role in any future crisis, are more distracted than ever. My final point is to say simply that more research is needed into the data and facts of emerging technologies related capabilities in South and Southern Asia, into their role as shaping current and future threat perceptions, and study also how they combine to enhance and undermine stability and therefore conventional and nuclear strategy. The IISS is at the forefront of this work and will be for the years to come. With this, I end, and I thank all of you in the room and online for your attention and very much look forward to our discussion. Thank you. Over to you, Ayusha.
Thank you, Antoine, for your very valuable insights and the whole discussion of the topic from different dimensions and different aspects of it. Ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to open the session for question and answers. I would like to request and encourage our participants joining online to please post their questions in Q&A option. At the moment, first of all, I would like to ask participants if they're present in the SVI room to post any questions if they have, and then I will start taking questions from online audience because at the moment we don't have any questions.
Yes, thank you. My name is Shayan Jami. I'm a research officer here at the SVI. And my question is for both Dr. Salik and Mr. Antoine. You both mentioned that not all technologies live up to their hype. So if we were to analyze the history of technologies, and specifically those technologies that do live up to their hype, are there any common features that we can identify and sort of build a pattern out of? Thank you.
So I think one thing is to remember that throughout the evolution of military technologies in history, you will find that no technology ever emerged without very soon finding its match. So as soon as these technologies develop and mature, within a very short while, you start finding the countermeasures to that and the technologies to counter those. And I think that has been the pattern always. And my guess is that in terms of all these emerging and futuristic technologies, this is going to be the same. That as these technologies mature, by that time or soon after that, there will be technologies which can utilize their impact.
Thank you. I think that's a great question. I would concur with what Dr. Salik said. I would also caution against thinking that technology can find its match in such a way which has strategic effects. I think it's very easy to enter into competitive dynamics, military ones in particular, which may lead to a tit-for-tat response, as much as it is economically possible, to the adoption of a technology by another side and its deployment as a dedicated military technology, while losing sight that what matters is the achievement of strategic effect. So, in other words, over-investing in equipment which are reactive to other adversaries is one thing, but the ability to affect strategic outcomes is not necessarily dependent on the ability to be reactive to the other's capabilities. I would also add more generally that emerging and disruptive technology environments on a national basis emerge proportionate to the number of lines of effort pursued, particularly when close to the more fundamental research and to an extent the development side of those technologies. In other words, the more people are working on a diversity of projects, sometimes in combination, but sometimes in competition, the more likely you are to create an ecosystem which will be reactive to the needs and to the strategic imperatives of national defense. So in other words, being overly efficient in the nurturing of and selective in nurturing the emergence of a technology industry and industrial base can have its drawbacks. And so the challenge for policymakers, defense planners, and industry is to find the right balance between breadth and depth, as I said in my remarks, and the ability to shape specific technologies as required for the purposes of strategic effect. And that balance is forever evolving because of the nature of the technologies themselves, but also because countries' ability to afford technology changes. And I mentioned in my remarks the global trade and the global power politics of technology, which compared to 20 or 30 years ago have evolved considerably, and which are having an impact on established defense industrial powers as much as it's having it on emerging powers.
Thank you so much, Antoine. Okay, now we have questions online, so I'll this time I'll take questions from online, and then I'll give the room, give the floor to the participants in the room. So there's a question from Vishal Sanwaz and Zohaib Altaf, and I think they both are on the same line, so I'm going to mix that question. It is, do you think that asymmetrical acquisition of technologies for nuclear purposes by states would have a consequence in lowering nuclear threshold between countries? And how do you think that India-US technological cooperation is going to impact strategic stability in South Asia? Second question is especially addressed to Antoine, and the first question is addressed to both of the parts.
Should I go first?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. I think on the first question, it's highly dependent on context and what the asymmetry is. It also depends on, if we narrowly look at the India-Pakistan situation, it depends on affordability, it depends on use doctrine. Now, as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs reminded everyone at the Shangri-La Dialogue, Pakistan has a doctrine of full spectrum deterrence, and it has a quid pro quo self-assigned mission to respond to conventional escalation. So in that context, emerging technologies, if adopted by Pakistan, are especially important to scrutinize in detail. And it's very important to realize that plans to acquire technology are not the actual acquisition of a technology. The induction of a prototype in service does not equate to a necessarily significant force. That induction of a full-fledged capability does not equate to use. And so it's very important to assess, I think, the facts of what happens. And to do this in context, when you see escalation take place in general terms, it's then incredibly important to understand that the battlefield dynamics have to account for the fog of war, for asymmetries which of information and perception, which in some ways may become less because of the more transparent nature of the battlefield nowadays, but may also increase on the basis of disinformation and misperceptions. And that is independent of any actual offensive use of emerging technologies or new technologies which haven't yet been used in the India-Pakistan context. What I do note is that in the last few years, particularly in 2019, a threshold was crossed in the use of air power by both countries in a way which was unprecedented. So this tells me that there is a risk appetite in both countries to consider crossing thresholds by relying on new capabilities. So I think emerging technologies are especially important in that enabling political and strategic context. I forget, no, the second question related to US-India
Technological cooperation.
technology cooperation.
It's an implication on strategic stability in South Asia.
I think, again, the facts matter a lot. This is a big week for India-US relations. Prime Minister Modi is paying a state visit to the United States. Elements of technology cooperation have already been revealed in the public domain, particularly the GE414 engine, which was a long-standing question for and a sort of test for US-India cooperation. It appears that an agreement is now secure between the two countries, which will secure some technology transfer to India. But I would, I don't want to preempt any announcements which will be made and any details which are going to be released. But I would generally invite caution based on the understanding that what counts is the detail and the actual timelines for implementation of such agreements. More broadly, the US-India relationship is in a very good place in terms of technology cooperation, applied or not to defense, because of this enabling framework which the two leaders, President Biden, Prime Minister Modi, announced last year, which was put into motion on the 30th of January this year, the bilateral initiative for critical and emerging technologies framework, which critically relies on the national security advisors of the two countries. Now, I think, given the maturity of the India-US relationship, its ability to now function on the basis of institutions rather than individuals, the involvement of the two national security advisors to direct and impulse such a complex and ambitious agenda for cooperation is welcome. I think that more broadly, the implications of that agreement for regional stability and crisis stability will take years to be borne out. I would, again, relentlessly invite analysts to consider the practicalities of all this as much as the outlook and the political messaging, which is undoubtedly significant and important otherwise. I'll stop there.
I think as far as US-India cooperation in technology is concerned, my concern is about the sharing of real-time intelligence information and space cooperation, which has increased India's surveillance and target acquisition capabilities. And that is going to impact the security situation in South Asia as well. Although the general feeling is that the US is building up India's capabilities to enable them to challenge China. But what happens is that once those capabilities are acquired by India, they can equally be used against Pakistan. And that puts Pakistan at a disadvantage. And but that doesn't seem to be the concern of the Americans at the moment, because they are just worried about India being able to challenge China, and not about how it is going to impact on India-Pakistan relationship. The second thing is that although these technologies are not going to make a mark in South Asia in the near future, it is going to be some time before they really become effective here. But in general terms, what we call the strategic non-nuclear weapons, these advanced technology weapons, which are conventional weapons, but they have strategic capabilities because of their ranges and accuracy. They are going to have a very serious impact, not really bringing the nuclear threshold down, but tempting the countries which have possession of those technologies to go for a preemptive first strike against the opponent's nuclear forces, which otherwise they would be reluctant, because of the if they use nuclear weapons for such kind of a mission, there will always be the danger of collateral damage. And once they use these precision weapons with very little collateral damage possibilities, then there'll be greater readiness to use these weapons for these kind of preemptive strikes. And that is going to destabilize the situation. And that is where the danger is, which can obviously, in that case, these technologies, though conventional, can have a very serious impact on the nuclear equation as well.
Now I would like to take a question from in-house participants. Yeah, sure, please.
Thank you. Can I just respond to some of these points in the spirit of discussion? I hear Dr. Salik about talking about intelligence and targeting capabilities, but again, I would look to how mature these technologies would be on the basis of actual provision of sensors and other information, and the timelines around this. You also raised the question of bifurcation of capabilities. This is something I was particularly interested in the context of this report I wrote, where it was an idea which I thought might have some legs to somehow find a framework under which India and Pakistan could agree or come to some form of coordinated understanding over the single dedication of some of India's capabilities to China, to the exclusion of Pakistan. But I have to say, in some of my research, I found that actually the strongest opposition to this was probably from Pakistan, where the sort of defense planning reflex was to say a capability is a capability regardless of intent. And that's a major assumption which is very hard to circumvent. And I'm not aware of any historical historical precedents where On the basis of geography, for instance, it has been possible to say that this particular weapon is destined for this particular adversary to the exclusion of the other. But I think it's an interesting set of conceptual ideas which need to be explored further. As much as I think India has perceptions related to China, I think it also has very strong perceptions of Pakistan and how Pakistan relates to China. So the point in saying this is that it is in the end a lot more of a triangle or triangular relationship than perhaps it was a few years ago. And this has all sorts of implications which are worth studying, not just in terms of capability, but in terms of crisis behavior and crisis diplomacy. And finally, on preemptive first strike, this, in my view, supposes that India changes its nuclear doctrine, and I do not see that as being something under discussion. And I don't see that prospect taking place anytime soon. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Antoine, this is Nasir Hafiz. Once we were discussing this impact of the technology, the emerging technology, you may call them the disruptive technologies on the warfare. So I was thinking of a correlationship of the pace of the discovery and the development of these technologies and the pace of induction and acquisition of equipment in the militaries. There's a traditional cycle in which we have already been discussing that some new technologies come, and once they are inducted, and by the time the armies and militaries they induct those technologies and train their individuals to use them in the battlefield, by the time this process is going on, we face and we feel that those technologies, those who have been inducted, they are obsolete now. So again, that in the mid, once the cycle is on, so the armies or the militaries have to rethink of a new cycle, starting a new cycle of induction. So as you have been highlighting, and Dr. Salik is also highlighting, that these technologies being disruptive in nature also disrupt the cycle of induction of equipment in the militaries also. Because nobody can, with any certainty say that the equipment which they are inducting today is going to be the best equipment, because tomorrow there will be a new technology which is going to change the dynamics. If this is going to change the cycle of induction, it is certainly also changing the battlefield of tomorrow. I am looking at the future battlefield and also a new soldier which is coming, that would be a keyboard soldier. A soldier who would be sitting in a room and, using his keyboard, would be launching an attack and, seeing the impact on the screen, more like a video game. And then the impact generation, the war games which we are, which I am just in the process of thinking all these technologies, would be a simulated kind of an activity on the screens. Though, we have also seen that drones and, being operated by the Americans in Afghanistan also had the similar kind of impact, where a person sitting in so much far away from a location is using his keyboard and the joystick is going to take a shot onto a target and, will not hear the screams, will not smell the smoke, and, will be dislocated from the battlefield and will be conducting a strike. So with these new technologies, not only I think the militaries will change, the soldiers will change, the landscape of the battlefield will change. But I think there would be, it would be so difficult to assume that what we are going to finally find out at the end, the doctrine, the organization, the weapons and equipment, all the organization of the militaries is likely to undergo some substantial change. So I don't know whether the military is ready for this. The traditional organizational theory which is out there, will that survive the onslaught of this technology? Your views on that?
Thank you. These are really perceptive comments. Again, I'm speaking from a position as a civilian here, with an interest in these issues, but no expertise in military organization. I mean, to your first point on sort of forecast obsolescence, I think that's a given for any military which is under resource constraint, which is 99 or 98% of militaries, and it's particularly the case for militaries which are unable to afford a vast array of capabilities to suit a very wide array of threats and contingencies. Very few militaries are able to spend enough to hedge across the full spectrum of contingencies they might face today, but also tomorrow. So that makes the decisions and the stakes around the relevance of acquisition of programs very high indeed for most countries. What you don't want to do is to fight the last war, but the risks of not necessarily fighting the right next war are quite high. I don't think anyone's found a formula for this. Money does help, and this takes us back to sort of the divide between major and other powers. It also takes us back to questions around prosperity, affordability, which span much wider than the military tool. Organization and the ability to be flexible with the capabilities you have is very, very important. And this is something which I think most militaries already think about, but are going to have to think a lot more about, i.e., you may possess a military specific capability which you must find ways to quickly recombine with civilian off-the-shelf capabilities which you can then use for a specific need which has arisen. And we've seen some lessons from this in the Ukraine context. The question around the changing ethics of conflict and the changing human experience of conflict are very well taken. I mean, warfare is at its simplest a question of kinetic effect and violence and genuine in-person interaction, but postmodern experiences of warfare have been around for nearly a decade now, and I think we're just going to see a latest iteration of this occur. The challenge is to really never forget that abstract and remote actions have an impact on real people and have a physical impact on capability. What operations in the cyber domain have done in the last few years is actually contribute to re-establishing a link between actions in the cyber domain and physical infrastructure in particular. The number of succeeding cyber operations which have disabled part or whole of infrastructure is important in a variety of countries, and shows that the chain between the operator behind his keyboard and the real-world effect is actually a lot shorter than otherwise sometimes thought. So I think the to and fro between the virtualization of the experience of warfare and the very real kinetic effects will continue to guide the thinking of militaries. I have to say that the reoccurrence of a major high-intensity conflict in Ukraine has also, I think, drawn minds back to the fundamentals of conflict surrounding not just territory seizure, but also simply the human cost of war. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoine. I guess I'll just briefly summarize a few questions together and then 5 minutes to the end, because I know that we are already exceeding from the time limit. There's this brief comment made by Air Marshal Ashfaq Arais that somehow the development of emerging technologies remains synonymous to defense. This perception leads to a limited benefit from these technologies and ever-increasing competition between the rivals. Wouldn't it be better to emphasize to develop these technologies for civil applications and use them in the defense as a spin-off benefit? This may lead to more cooperation and greater benefits for the developing nation. And then there's this question that I would like both of the panelists to make a comment on. It's that, do you think that arms control treaties should be needed for emerging technologies proliferation in nuclear domain to reduce or curb the uncertainty or impact of the proliferation? Thank you.
I think there are two aspects to this. One is that most of the technologies are dual use by nature, particularly the space technologies, the communication technologies, the information technologies. They are necessarily dual use. They have both civilian as well as military applications, and it has always been the case. You go back to early 19th century with the railways, for instance, and the telegraph, which brought a revolution to warfare. They were basically civilian technologies. The steam power had applications in the large-scale industry. It also ran the locomotive power, and which the same trains were used to carry passengers as well as the soldiers to the front lines. Similarly, the communication technology, telegraph, and now the latest information technologies, the computers, all these things are dual use by nature. So the research and development goes on not necessarily to develop a technology for military purposes or civilian purposes. Once a particular technology is developed for a specific use, it does have spin-off. Nuclear weapons, for instance, were developed initially for weapon purposes, but then we had spin-off in the form of the peaceful uses of nuclear technology in terms of power generation, in terms of medical uses, in terms of uses in agriculture and various other fields. So this always happens, and this will continue to happen. The second part of question you said was about
arms control.
Arms control. Yes, I think there is a requirement, and there are efforts going on. For instance, in the negotiations have been going on in Geneva to regulate the cyber as well as these. Obviously, there are people thinking about regulating the artificial intelligence. But the problem here is that the progress is slow because only few countries have access to these technologies. And since bulk of the countries do not have it, there is little interest in the advanced countries to accept any kind of restrictions on the capabilities which they exclusively have. Once they spread more widely, I think there will be greater incentive on everyone's part to have multilateral regulations and arrangements in form of arms control agreements and other restrictions on the and regulations, in fact, in the use of these kind of technologies.
Thank you. Two good questions very quickly. I mean, to the first question, there's no doubt in my mind that the vast majority of these technologies we're talking about, which I listed in my talk and Dr. Salik did too, are originated from the civilian domain. And so on that basis, the prosperity aspect of them is the first and most important. Now, the difficulty is the application in the same country. These or same countries, these technologies have been developed, and even more so in countries which they were not developed, and so comes into consideration the trade element of these technologies, and we return then to very established questions around non-proliferation, around ensuring that export controls are in place. And these become very well-established lines of discussion. As Dr. Salik mentioned, yes, and some technologies are developed specifically for their military applications. I tried to speak to this a little bit. That presents obvious advantages of being more specifically tailored to requirements. It allows for longer development and industrial maturation. But they are limited in scope necessarily, and they are sometimes even the costs of them are shared across the civilian sector. So if you seek nuclear weapons, one way of ensuring that the cost of your fuel cycle is as low or at least as reasonable as possible is to rely on a civilian nuclear industry. And that's essentially a point converging with Dr. Salik's. On the point about the trade-off between prosperity and securitization, I would refer you to the US DNI Haynes's remarks at the Shangri-La Dialogue, which are on the IISS website. She discusses at length the trade-off which the United States is seeing on the use of artificial intelligence as having downsides, but also having upsides for prosperity. And that single discussion, I think, sums up the dilemma which cuts across all emerging and disruptive technologies. On arms control, I think the cue will have to come from US-China relations, and to an extent from US-Russia relations. And the latter will be overly determined by the duration and outcome of the Ukraine war. The former will be shaped by the possibility or not of there being a new political modus vivendi between China and the United States, on the basis of the developments of the last few days, but also on the basis of a wider understanding between them that they are peer competitors to each other. And I don't see either prospects in both and separate dyads being realized anytime soon. So what you're left with is ideas around risk reduction, ideas around norms of behavior, ideas about what responsible behavior looks like, ideas about guardrails in particular situations, which are all very good, which rely on established formulas, avoidance of accidents at sea, for example, is a concept which you can extend to the space domain. I mentioned the work we are involved in at the IISS, trying to think of a framework which would include a space traffic control, domain awareness, globally available to spacefaring countries, which would have the impact of reducing some of the friction or some of the needless friction in space to focus the minds more on the truly national security related behaviors, certainly in the low orbit. So there are accommodations possible, but they will have to come within a global reassessment of what arms control should and can do, and on the basis of a new balance between the top-tier powers, which I don't yet see quite happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoine, for your for answering this question in detail, and thank you for your presentation. Thank you for coming today and to deliberate on the topic with us. Ladies and gentlemen, with this, I would like to end the session. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to thank online participants who had participated in this webinar. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Antoine.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Dr. Salik, to SBI for the opportunity. I look forward to seeing you soon, I hope in person in the coming months again. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.